So this is the first of, I've never had to do an emergency podcast before, but I feel like we do. And Bret, you and I have been in communication about this, and this seemed like something that we have to do quicker than later.
All right, what's cracking, YouTube? It's your boy Justin G. Pluto. First and foremost, thanks for tuning into this video. I appreciate you taking the time to check out what I may have to say. Now, this one is simple. This one is simply a review, synopsis video of a recent podcast put out by Joe Rogan. This one with Bret Weinstein and Dr. Pierre Kory. I found this one particularly fascinating, and I like to do these videos from time to time. On podcasts that I find fascinating because I think they're worth getting out to a wider audience. I know some people really don't have the time to sit down and listen to a 3-hour podcast, or choose not to do so, but are still curious as to some of the key points that occurred within those conversations. So that's really the intention of these videos, is to give you somewhat of a shortened version of some of the things, the key takeaways from these conversations, and then give you like maybe a little preview trailer to some of that information. And maybe, if you choose to, you'll go listen to the full conversation yourself. But thanks for trusting me to deliver some of the most important ideas and information from these podcasts. So this realistically is only the third one I've made, and I definitely plan on making more. So with that being said, bear with me as I really dial in the process to this, like how exactly is it going to play out every time. So like this time I just took some bullet points while I listened along, and I'm going to go ahead and read from these bullet points for you. So really this podcast, it's episode 1671. Again, the guests on the episode are Dr. Pierre Kory and Bret Weinstein. It's an emergency podcast, they called it. They called an emergency podcast to call out the censorship campaign obscuring ivermectin as a prophylactic against SARS-CoV-2 and as a treatment for COVID-19. This conversation, for one, I found incredibly fascinating and informative. A lot of really good stuff here, but the main point of this conversation was just that, to call out the censorship campaign about obscuring ivermectin. Now, ivermectin, we'll go on to learn, is an antiviral drug that is being used successfully to treat against COVID-19, and there is actively a disinformation campaign, or was for quite some time. New evidence brings to the surface the question: is this disinformation and censorship campaign about shareholders and EUA's emergency use authorization? That was a question asked directly by Bret Weinstein. Video went in and out, but we are still good. But first, who are Bret Weinstein and Dr. Pierre Kory? Dr. Pierre Kory is a ICU and lung specialist who is an expert in the drug ivermectin, specifically as a treatment for COVID-19. Bret Weinstein is an evolutionary biologist who hosts the Dark Horse podcast, which I also enjoy often from time to time. First came into like the public sphere with his early run-in with woke and cancel culture at Evergreen College in 2017. Now, if you're curious more about that, I would definitely go look into that a little bit. It's an interesting read as to how that played out. He and his wife, Heather Herring, were both professors at Evergreen College at the time. But Bret and Pierre agree that ivermectin could be used to effectively end the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, I'm just reading from these bullet points that I took while listening, kind of some of the key takeaways. Ivermectin is not patent protected, with no one standing to profit from its implementation as a treatment for COVID-19. The claim is that political interests, big pharma, and establishment corporations cost the world lives due to their greed, withholding information, and intentionally campaigning against treatments such as ivermectin. That just made me think, besides the anti-Donald Trump narrative and his referencing of it, is this why hydroxychloroquine was attacked so violently in the mainstream media? Just simply because it didn't fit their narrative, and the people that stand to profit from the drugs other than hydroxychloroquine like there aren't interests that stand to profit from drugs like hydroxychloroquine. Quick Google search, I just looked. It looks like the original patent for hydroxychloroquine has expired, and it is, I don't know what it would be if the patent's expired, but I think anyone can make a generic version of it and profit from it, and it rather than just one. Because like if you patent something, it's only so long. Your patent lasts for a certain amount of time, where basically you have a head start to using this product. And I know this is how pharmaceutical companies oftentimes profit very massively, is because they have the first dibs to the product that they produce, usually a medicine of some sort. If, like, let's say, I think this is why insulin is so expensive, because there is a patent on insulin. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe in the United States, only one company has FDA approval to produce insulin or something. I could be missing the point entirely on that. So at one point, Joe Rogan makes a joke that might be the best thing. Okay, that might be the best thing it has going for ivermectin, is that Donald Trump never mentioned it. Apparently, ivermectin is specifically named as a violation of community guidelines and the YouTube terms of service, according to Bret. There was a lot of very compelling data in this episode, specifically to the usefulness and effectiveness of ivermectin and the way it's been used around the world, especially in its use against COVID-19 specifically. So yeah, there's lots of very compelling data, but one data point, sorry, this freaking keeps disconnecting. I don't know what the hell, and then it gets me distracted and off my rhythm for a second. But one key point specifically was in Mexico, hospitalizations were reduced as much as 75% due to ivermectin when it was implemented widely as a treatment. They had some specific program where they implemented ivermectin widely, and that was before vaccination in the country was over 5%. So hospitalizations were reduced by as much as 75% due to ivermectin, and you can't say that drop in hospitalizations was correlated with vaccines, because vaccines at the time were under 5%. So Dr. Pierre Kory has effectively treated patients with ivermectin since sometime in the third quarter of 2020. I think he said he's up to hundreds, close to thousands, if I didn't hear him incorrectly. I personally thought Joe Rogan used his platform somewhat heroically in this instance. He's given great voice to Bret Weinstein over the course of the past year, or great access to his platform over the course of the past year, which has been awesome. And I think in this instance, this was Bret and Dr. Pierre Kory hitting up Joe Rogan, basically being like, hey, we got to call this emergency podcast. This information needs to get out. I need my inhaler if you can't tell. But yeah, both Bret and Dr. Pierre Kory have been censored unfairly and even maliciously by YouTube, Twitter, and other social media platforms over the course of the past year. For instance, since April 2020, simply the mention of ivermectin has been censored on social media platforms. Personally, my first experience witnessing the censorship of Bret was during the Unity 2020 and Dark Horse Duo campaign. That was a mission to save the United States at the time of the election last year. If you're unaware of that, pretty noble mission that I was a follower of and supporter of. Twitter went ahead and removed the official Articles of Unity Twitter page with virtually no explanation as to why. Now, the Articles of Unity campaign ruffled feathers in the establishment. Like, they were true. It was truly a threat to. It was truly a threat to like the establishment candidates at the time, bringing in some big names like Tulsi Gabbard, Justin Amash, Dan Crenshaw, Andrew Yang, and a few other pretty popular names at the time were coming in to have conversations and kind of alluding to like they would be interested in taking on this idea of the dark horse duo and trying to really give power back to the people in the democratic process. And yeah, so that Articles of Unity Twitter page was removed at one point, like I said, with virtually no explanation. Now, really, that was, as far as the podcast goes, there obviously a lot of detail that gets missed here in my short synopsis of it, but there was a ton of data that was shared in support of ivermectin and its effectiveness. There was really a continuation of the anti-establishment theme that the Joe Rogan Experience has, and like the unchained exploration of thoughts and ideas, which is really what drew me personally into wanting to watch a show originally quite some time ago, was that appeal, and I'm sure a lot of other people. And I think conversations with like this one in particular really drive that home. You know, just like what drove us to wanting to tune into these conversations in the first place, I think really stand out in these recent conversations, and particularly this one with Bret Weinstein and Dr. Pierre Kory. But yeah, Bret also claims essentially it is unethical to vaccinate children, and they should rather be given ivermectin, as well as any vaccinated breakthrough cases of COVID should be treated with ivermectin. Ivermectin is shown to be safe, apparently, to be used in children, whereas I don't think the COVID vaccines have been proven particularly 100% safe. Nothing truly is. And as far as using ivermectin in the instances of breakthrough cases, Bret's reasoning being that people have already done what's been asked of them and now give them what we know for sure works. I think he said something along those lines.
Big of a difference it is, if I understood you correctly. But the way I see that censorship and that TNI, I think it's called Trusted News Initiative. Again, I don't know enough about it, but from what I understand, it was a consortium of major media outlets that came to some sort of agreement to suppress medical misinformation, and I guess it was somehow defined as anything that doesn't come from what I call the gods of science and knowledge, right? So from the leading agencies. And when you talk about, I've been working on this analogy, which is that it's almost like you're in a plane emergency, right? And a plane is crashing, like we're in an emergency right now, and everyone's saying, listen to the captain. You have to listen to the captain's instructions. Don't listen to anyone else, but listen to the captain. And no one's considering what if the hijackers already got the captain. And you're not listening to really good advice. And that's what it seems like here. We're listening to hijackers.
Yeah, or your house is on fire and there's a bucket of water and somebody stops you from using it because you haven't proved it's water. You know?
I love those analogies. Yes.
Yeah, something is not adding up here. And I think it is worth pointing out that I don't know what explains it, but throughout this story, we've got Dr. Fauci in a very strange position. So again, right? And that's the problem. So at the same point that we have a drug that appears to work, in fact, we have several of them, he's announcing a search for drugs that might work, right? That's conspicuous. This is the same person who was apparently circumventing the ban on gain-of-function research by sending the research offshore to the Wuhan Institute using EcoHealth Alliance, right? Why is the same guy in a position where he may have contributed to causing the pandemic, and now here he is in a position to do something about the pandemic, and he's making exactly the wrong decision? He's not wielding the tools we have. He's announcing a search for new tools as if the tools we have don't exist. Nothing here adds up, and at the very least, okay, so nothing adds up. We can't talk about it in the official channels because the official channels are constrained. And then the free people who discuss this on the internet, who take their expertise on the internet and discuss the fact that something is not adding up, are being silenced by YouTube and Facebook and whoever else. And the point is, it all points to one thing, right? For some reason, there's a desire not to apply this tool, and there is a pursuit of other tools, and there is no cost-benefit analysis that will cause that system to rethink.
It's not scientifically based. That's what I want to be clear, because
But another real key, I think I mentioned it, but I didn't really drive it home. But a lot of this conversation also was around censorship, particularly, and how basically they implied that there is like this connection potentially between some of these larger pharmaceutical companies that stand to potentially profit from COVID treatments and vaccines, and the conveyors of information, the social media platforms and the news organizations, like essentially that they're in some form of cahoots, and some of the censorship is being used tactfully by those pharmaceutical companies to misinform and disinform the public about these treatments and things such as ivermectin specifically, and they're censoring against anything that isn't support of the mainstream narrative, essentially, and in support of the products and treatments that stand to make the most profits for these interests. I think that's just really important to add to this video, is that is a real key point to the conversation, is how censorship is being used, and that there is potentially a relationship between the conveyors of information and the pharmaceutical companies. They're working together to stand in the way of anything that will get in the way of their profits. As always, thanks y'all for tuning in to another Justin G. Pluto YouTube video. What's poppin', y'all? Thanks for being here. Hit like, hit subscribe if you want to support me. I definitely, as always, would highly recommend going to view this full podcast itself. I can't give you all of the information that's being conveyed in it or all the ideas that were shared, but I think it's important to kind of take some of these key takeaways if you aren't going to take the time to listen to the video or to the conversation yourself. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.